Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. MNP is very happy to be part of the conference this year and also to be an associate member of the BC Craft Brewers Guild. This morning, I have the pleasure of introducing a couple of my colleagues here in BC. Eva Tone, who is our a partner with us in BC and also our leader for British Columbia of our food and beverage processing client service group. Also Ed Olson, who is a member of our national enterprise risk team and provides consulting services to our clients on managing their various risks in their business. And that's going to be the topic of our presentation this morning. So just a couple of things to note. If you do have questions during the presentation, please enter them in the chat window. The presenters will try to monitor those and answer as many of those questions as they can during the presentation. And if they don't get to your questions, then certainly we'll have contact information up there at the end of the presentation, so you'll be able to follow up with us and make sure that your questions get answered. So I know it's a full presentation, not a long amount of time to deal with this important topic of business disruption. So I'm going to pass it over to Ed and to Eva right away. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate that. I'm just wondering, can you see my screen? It's having a hard time broadcasting the actual presentation in full format, unfortunately.
I can see it.
If the participants can, then good. I think we're off to a start, and I'm sorry I can't broadcast it as the full screen, so that's a little bit limiting right now. Just to kick things off, Eva, did you want to introduce yourself any further, or is it good that we can hit the ground running?
We can hit the ground running.
Perfect.
Jeff did a good job.
There's something here that I find fascinating in terms of the interchangeability of business resilience and business continuity that people talk about. And it's actually really quite important that we bring a delineation that they actually represent two separate topics. They're not the same thing. When you think of business resilience, that's responding to what is happening to you. And business continuity is knowing what could happen. So it includes, what are you going to do when something happens? And do you have a strategy for what to do if that event was to occur? Or is business resilience even on your radar right now? Really thinking of the impacts of the pandemic as a classic example. How have you actually adjusted your style of business or the way you even interact with your customers? If you've changed, then good, you're on your path to resiliency, good on you. But the real question is whether or not you were prepared for this, or if it actually caught you by surprise. Keeping the surprise as a risk to your organization, it's something that I want you to keep in mind, is to avoid the surprise. That's what we're really after in this whole presentation. So when we think about understanding the business right now, to me, we have to start looking at, do you know your business? And what I mean by this, and you'd be amazed how many times I ask our clients, what do you do? What product or service do you sell? What makes your organization different from your competitors? Everything really comes down to value. But do you know what your value is? If you're McDonald's and you've got the Big Mac, the secret sauce is the value of what has people coming back to you. Have you even started thinking, well, it's my distribution network that's really of value? Try asking yourself the question, what do I do? But then take it even beyond that to ask the question, what is a value that I create or that I offer? And on the screen, what we're trying to depict is, if you identify it, then you have to protect it, and you want to generate more of that value, which is really going to mandate how are we actually wrapping up what we do in the provision of that value to our customers and everybody else who's involved. But break it down further. So if I take this beyond value, here's where I start pushing you a little bit. You have to ask yourself, what are those key business processes you employ? What do you do to deliver on your value? And this screen is meant to give you an idea of some examples. have you thought about or considered finance? Well, what does finance do? And the processes that we have for accounts payable and receivable, payroll and taxes, everything that you do is the financial arm that drives your organization. Do you know what's critical there that helps you build, sustain, protect your value? Or your key personnel? I know everybody wants to be considered critical and key, but when you really look at people, who is it that you need in order to create that beer, sell that beer, distribute that beer? What is it that makes you different? And I'm sorry if it's trying to read the slides right now to comment that it's a little bit harder. So I'm going to try and expand this even further. Don't know why it's not allowing me to present. These slides will be available for you after the fact as well. The last thing I want to do is when you look at materials and inputs and inventory and suppliers and sources, have you really taken a look at those are what I need to do my job, what it is that is going to drive my ability to understand what is critical in the protection, provision, and building out of that value. So Eva, I know there's some questions and things to consider. Can you walk us through what businesses should keep on their mind when they're looking at who they are, their value, and what to consider in their processes?
Yeah, we thought it would be a good idea for everyone to kind of come up with a baseline, because if this were me, I think everyone feels resilient, like you feel like your business is strong, but these are a couple of good questions to help you come up with a baseline. So have you identified your business operations? Ed kind of spoke to that. Do you know all the steps, all the processes? You might, but if you weren't there, can someone else do that? Have you prioritized recovery for each aspect of the business operation? That means if one of those things falls out, people always think, maybe people, it could be equipment, it could be technology, it could be supply of inputs, it could be even your location, the power going out, right? Have you thought about what do you do if any of those things happen? Do you know what is required to recover prioritized operations? Have you thought about this? Do you have a plan? Are those activities feasible, and are resources available when required? So almost going through your plan when things go wrong, step by step. I find entrepreneurs are very big picture, and you think maybe in 2 or 3 steps when someone might need 6 steps, and it mapped out a little bit in more detail. Question number 5 we have, is everyone aware of the priorities and recovery sequence? So I think I already jumped to that one. And then, is your approach documented? Because you are often the critical piece, right? And it's sometimes good to just have an employee manual when you're in stressful situations that you can just grab and pull. And often that's just having contact information, right? Like, who are you using for internet when you're down, or your credit card system, or supplier options, stuff like that. So if you're going through this and you're thinking about this for the first time and it's like, no, then yeah, maybe think about that and just spend some time. And we'll get to that at the end as well. That's the whole point of this.
So Eva, we talked about business continuity in the beginning, that we're looking at those things that are potentially going to impact your business. What should businesses be keeping on their mind?
Well, the things that cause disruption, I think the big one, and why it's at the forefront of everyone's mind right now, is the pandemic. And who would have ever thought that would come? Nobody, right? Well, I didn't. But there's other things that can disrupt you that are smaller, right? And that are very much day to day, right? I mean, fire, flood, pandemic, storm, earthquake, those are external factors that probably impact a lot of people, but there's other little things like hazardous material, crime, accident, power outage. I can't see the other one over there. But there's little things that happen. Like, I even had it that an employee all of a sudden was unable to show up to work, right? And then people were like, well, do you know the password? Like, there's little things that can happen, and you don't want to find out in the moment, oh no, we're stalled because of this tiny thing. You want your business to stay fluid, right? Like, you want to be able to pivot, and you don't want to have to think of a plan when you're in that emergency situation.
and Eva, that you were talking about this too. We wanted to give some examples to those who are participating today. Did you know that the risk you face with one employee opening one email and it might say cute furry puppy, and you think, well, there can't be anything wrong with that, and it can cause an immediate disruption to everything that you do in your technology and cut you down? It could even be ransomware. Are you prepared from a technology perspective to say, what do you do if that was to happen? How do you even inform and make sure your employees are mature around what they do with your technology, how they use it, what they're exposing you to? Eva, you talked about a pandemic. It's going to impact absolutely everything that is being done. But if you had a loss of water, if you couldn't flush toilets, if you couldn't access drinking water, you can't operate. Now, what do? How long can you survive? How does it impact your processing? How does it impact your employees? And because employee safety is absolutely paramount, and it's the number one issue that's come out of the COVID-19, the pandemic, is how do we protect our employees? What do you do? Including, we rely so much on other third parties in our supply chain that if one of those were disrupted, do you have a replacement? What else should you consider? So what we've tried to do here, and again, you're going to see this theme throughout, we're going to give some content, but then poke you with some questions. And we really want you to think, can you answer these? Do you know what you face externally and internally? And could you even jot it down on a piece of paper? And I've done this with clients. Just tell me what you're exposed to. And it's amazing that you'll find what you thought was the complete picture is actually not the right picture. There's more that you're exposed to. How about even the likelihood of those events coming to fruition? Who would have said before 2020, the likelihood of a global pandemic is extremely high? You would have said it's very unlikely, if not ever going to happen. Testing your theory and your assumptions is so important. And to learn as we have gone, hey, we never thought a pandemic would hit. How does that start changing our assumptions on other externalities or internalities of what we face? And are we getting our staff to the position where they are aware and know what to do when a disruption actually does come and take them over? We want to look at critical business resources. And what do I mean by that? This is where I want to deep dive a little bit further into. If I could even challenge you to look at these 6 primary areas, start here, and there's an evolution from here. But if you said my critical resources are my people, my facilities where I operate, the equipment that we use, inventory of what we rely on, or information technology and suppliers. If you just started there, we want to deep dive a little bit further with you between Eva and I to talk about the factors of what you should keep in mind. So Eva, maybe you can kick this off.
Yeah, so I think it's also about mindset and being critical in your whole process. I find it's easy to say, oh, if my people aren't there, I'll just do it. Or if I always buy from this one supplier, if I don't get stuff from him, I'll go to the second or third one. Well, they already have main suppliers. Like maybe what you do is you buy 80% from one and you kind of fill a little bit and keep those other suppliers like in your good books and warm and already have a relationship. I've noticed that a lot with any food processing clients, that they used to just have main suppliers and they're spreading that risk over a couple. And I find it like very healthy to ask other people within the organization. You look top down, and the way you see things working is different than someone working on the floor making everything. It's different than someone in the shop serving. It's different than someone doing the deliveries. Like sometimes they have a different perspective on what's not going well, or where there could be improvements or things going wrong.
And another critical resource here is your human resource complement. And what I said a little bit earlier about COVID, it really did bring about a definitive awareness to understanding your role in protecting your employees. But have you reviewed your current employee list, those who are working for you, to identify those that are critical? And what I mean by critical is, and again, everyone is important, but not all are critical to what you do and what you carry out and the specialty skill sets that are required. For example, if only one person understands the brewing and the fermentation process, if you lose them, what's your backup? Are there any single points of failure in your employee complement, those with those skills that if you didn't have, you're not going to be in business? And it's fascinating when you start to evaluate what are the necessary skill sets, and then who has those skill sets. And if we didn't have them, what would it do to our business? It now starts you into the mindset of, well, I need to have a backup, or I need to increase training, or I need to cross-train with those who are in my organization. So we can even start the succession planning process. All of these are next steps, but it's critical to start with the what do I have, what's important, and now starting to put a forward-looking plan together to mature what you have in place. Technology, Eva.
Yeah, so people that use credit card processing systems, like your internet can go down and then you can't accept payment. I think that would be the worst thing. And even technology just as opportunity, right? Like we keep speaking about business resilience when things go wrong, right? Like a lot of people feel like this pandemic caused a lot of negative disruption. It also created a lot of positive opportunities. Like with the technology, how many people had the funds to be ready to go online, or were able to pivot that quickly, or had the foresight to maybe think this isn't just a month and things will go back to normal, right? Like to be able to pivot and do an online platform, which I think is very important.
You bring up something that's interesting when you consider online platform.
Hmm.
Even though there's three things on the screen for our customers, our suppliers, and vendors, if you just look at customers, how they interacted with you before the pandemic and how they're interacting with you now during the pandemic, there's different ways of looking at this. And technology is a great point to talk about earlier. They used to be able to walk into bricks and mortar, pick up product, or consume it on site. They're coming to see you. Whereas the whole different business mindset now has been, how do I take my product and ship directly to them? How do I access them if they're not coming to me? Were we prepared for this? Because at the end of the day, customers as a key stakeholder impacts directly to your cash flow. You wouldn't be in business if you weren't selling your product. So if you have to reevaluate your distribution network, before you might have considered transportation as, how do I get product to me? How do we create? How do we ship out to somebody who's going to sell for me? And now it's, who can be that pivotal competitive edge where I can ship directly to them? How do they access me? How do we create that user experience where they feel as if they did walk into a brick and mortar store, but really they're doing it online, and we're giving them almost the Amazon experience for those who see it as a positive thing, an Amazon experience. You have to change the way that you do business. Were you reactive to this when the pandemic hit? Or did you see customers as essential and looking at the way you interact with them, sell to them, market to them, allow them to interact with you? Are those open communication channels available? And if your technology wasn't there, this didn't take you far enough. But what about suppliers? One of the things I was chatting about with Eva even before this is I work with a lot of different industries, and we've got a utility in the Caribbean who is saying, we have essential parts for generating electricity. And those parts actually come from Europe. But the lag time that we would expect by placing our order and expecting it to come was usually a 3 to 6 month window. What they didn't realize is with the implications of the pandemic and how manufacturing is slowing down and shipping is slowing down, what used to be a 3 to 6 month is now an 8 to 12 month. Are you reflecting within your suppliers? How are they being interrupted? Are they able to meet the commitments in your contracts with them? If they can't, are you having a dialogue with them to say, what challenges are you facing and how can we work together? If you're hoping that they're going to meet their commitments, it's not enough. You really do need to be working on a, what's the contingency plan? How am I working with my suppliers? And the same methodology applies to your vendors. You have vendors that make your business successful. If they were disrupted, is there an alternative vendor? We were talking about equipment a little bit earlier. If you have a key piece of equipment, how many sources of vendors manufacture that same equipment, or is it only one? Because if it's only one, now you have a single point of failure, and you have to ask yourself the question, will they be there when I need them to? Or how do I look at changing the way I do business? Or that piece of equipment that I'm using, can we replace? Look at options. You really need to start asking. I know this whole presentation is about asking questions, but what we're hoping to do is if at the end of the day you say, Ed, Eva, we only answered 30% yes and there's 70% no, well, then I'm happy because this presentation is pushing you in the right direction. You need to do more. So Eva, can you take us through some more of those questions now that we're talking about them?
Yeah, I could read them out. So which employees are required for critical business activities? You can go through your workflow process and just kind of map that whole thing out. And Ed already alluded to this cross training. And it's just to hedge your risk if someone is sick or quits, or sometimes it's a family thing. I had a client where out of the blue, someone just died. You just think like, this would never happen to me. It was a younger person and it was just, stuff happens, life happens, right? Are you reliant on one location or many to produce your product? Can't read the whole thing. Can you produce elsewhere? So that's just not tying yourself to one person. And I've seen a lot of people pivot with that, because what you alluded to, Ed, with the suppliers, they want to supply with you, but they also have the same business. They're being fed by suppliers. And if that gets disrupted, that can be a problem. And you just want to maintain a competitive advantage, because the whole slogan, we're all in this together, we're all impacted together, but you don't want to be at that bottom of the impact. You want that little bit of a competitive advantage. So if you map this stuff out, and it's either speed of response time because you can contact someone faster, or you have a plan in place, or it's because you've diversified, however that looks. What is your inventory turnover rate? How long can you maintain current levels for product and sales? I find this super interesting because I always like to look at the positive things the pandemic has put on. And I've often driven by liquor stores and I'm like, I'm not lining up in that. And so I go to people directly now. And I think a lot more customers are doing that. They don't want to line up and risk going into like a big liquor store. If they have a beer they really like, they just want to go directly there and stock up. Were you able to handle that, right? Like, how quickly can you pivot? What's your turnaround time for ordering, for getting stuff in? Like, how fast can you go from like baseline to double, right? And same the other way, right? Like, when things shut down, like how quickly can you go from 0 to half? And there's fixed costs, like just evaluating that kind of stuff. And it swings in both ways, right? Number 4, where are you most heavily reliant on technology for daily operations and customer experience? So that has shifted, in my opinion. It may have been credit card processing and not so much orders coming in, or now individual customers are more seeking that technological point of contact, so there's no physical point of contact. So how have you adapted with that? There's so many apps around, and I think the Craft Brewers Association, that's such a good resource, right? Like to pool together and almost figure out like, what are other people using? There's so many neat tools out there that can make your life easier. Number 5, which third parties, vendors, and or suppliers are mission critical for your operation? That can be people, that can be your equipment, that might be super obvious, but a lot of these things will be very obvious, and it'll just make you feel more comfortable having thought of it.
Thanks, Eva. This really all ties back to strategy. I mean, of everything that we're doing right now, I'm going to ask, if don't put your hands up and don't respond publicly, but if you're really being honest with yourself, how many critical business processes of what we put on the screen, just as an example, how many of you really identified? But of those that are really critical, how many do you really understand? Like, how do you have a conversation on building resiliency if you're really not fully aware of how each critical business process interrelates with how you create value, sell to your customers, do business today? If you did a rough estimate and you looked at how many we've identified, but how many we've actually documented and understand, I think you're going to be surprised that you're evaluating your business, which is good, but you haven't gone to the level of detail that's required. And the real big value driver here is calibrating with your staff. Here's what's important. Here's why we do what we do. And if there's a disruption, who's responsible to do what, and how are we going to quickly bring about, I don't want to overuse this term, but the new normal. How do you get back to normal? That understanding, this is the whole baseline assessment. Even sit down after this presentation and say, what do we do? How do we do it? What process allows us to get there? And now, what exposures do we have? And if it was to happen, what are we going to do about it? Those questions need to be answered. So if we look at that context, Eva, can you just, is this a one-time effort? You get it done, you polish it off, life goes on, and we're happy?
Of course not. It's a mindset, because your business is always changing as well, right? And there's your customer is changing, there's new competitors coming out, technology is changing. Like, you always have to be at that forefront. And the way I see this pandemic, and what in my opinion is exciting about it, I feel like it was an earthquake to your business. It just like shook everything up, and now you have all your same building blocks. Are you going to rebuild the same way, or are you going to take this opportunity to be like, oh, there's some processes we were always doing, but they weren't that critical. Why are we doing them? And just reevaluating it, I find it such a great opportunity, using resilience as checks for emergency, like a seatbelt, right? But then also thinking, what can I do to be better, right? And that's where that continual improvement comes in. And I think it's so important to speak to everyone within the organization. I think that business owners often sit alone thinking they need all the answers, when I've always been amazed with how better other people's answers are than mine when you just ask, right? And what's the most frustrating thing in your day to day, or what are you most worried about when you come in? It might be something like super small that a staff member is worried about that you could fix, right?
So that is the perfect segue to this slide, what you can fix. The understanding of which levers do I have to pull that I can impact and affect change is good to know. And that's what we've been focusing on so far. But then there's this whole realm of those things that are outside of your control. And no matter what you do, you're still going to be exposed to disruption, to loss, those risks to your organization that financially you're going to take the hit for and you can't do anything about. But insurance is really critical. And that's where insurance in a risk management perspective says, how do we create that buffer, that protection? So if you're bungee jumping, it's the cable around your ankles to make sure you don't hit the water or don't hit the ground. Really looking now at, hey, let's ask some questions around insurance. When's the last time you've even evaluated, what do we have? What does it cover? And what are the clauses within the coverage that shows me what we're going to be covered for or not? Because you may find, if you haven't done an assessment recently, you may have an overestimation of the coverage that you're expecting, or the safety net that is underneath you for what the coverage is going to be. And realizing that is a good effort to continue to be up to date on what's changing in the insurance industry, how does it impact my policies, and do my policies cover enough? Because as your business grows and expands and geographically works, what used to work will not work in that larger corporate footprint of where you're operating. So please keep the insurance in mind and differentiate between what you can and can't control, now looking at how you protect yourself from those things that you can't control. So Eva, I know we're almost at the end of our half hour. In fact, we are. How do we start bringing all of this together? What do we need to focus on? What things should be kept in mind?
I like scoring. So if I were a business owner sitting here, I'd wonder, like, am I a 1 out of 10? Am I a 10 out of 10? Like, how good am I? So part of our give to the community is going to be a 30-minute free consultation with myself. So you can reach out to me, and I'll sit down and I'll kind of run you through some of these questions and like really make you feel uncomfortable. And for me, success would be if someone walked away and said, oh, we never thought of that, right? Because now you have. I know it sounds simple, but I think it's like a good, healthy thing to do to look into your business. We're so focused on getting stuff out and not sitting back and evaluating. So maybe I'll end with that number 5, don't struggle.
and you know, it's a great point, because to me, I found a lot of times when we come in and we sit down with a business owner and we ask them these questions about what they do and their processes and how they accomplish things, you almost have blinders that are put on because you've done it. You think you know your whole business. It's great. We're working the way we are, but you forget to do that environmental scan, or somebody challenging your assumptions. You realize you've overestimated your abilities and you've underestimated the risk that you actually face. That's typically what we see for all risk and strategy across a lot of organizations of, we've got it, don't worry, if it happens, we're resilient. Yeah. To me, it's now a matter of, if you want to test your resiliency, maybe take one of these scenarios and say, or you can use what you lived through in the pandemic. How did you respond differently? Did you do business differently? Why did you do it differently? And now let's take a step back and say, flood, fire, earthquake, any other driver, how will it change? Even if I completely pulled a supplier or a vendor away from you, you no longer had access. That scenario analysis of what you do will start challenging maybe we don't have the answer. Maybe we need to start looking into the answers, and maybe we do need some third-party help in order to figure out what does a sufficient answer look like. So those are all some of the things that we're trying to put together. There's enough to make you feel uncomfortable and enough to say, but hey, we've survived a pandemic. What more do we learn, and how do we continue to evolve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see it like a house on little stilts, right? Like I'll come in and I'll be like, I'll shake one and I'll shake one and I'll shake one and I'll shake one. And if you're still standing, fine, right? But maybe one of those little shakes will like trickle into something else and knock you off.
There's going to be a handout that we have actually prepared that should be able to, I don't know if we're sending out or it's going to be part of the package that we're giving, but it takes all these questions and it puts it together for you saying, hey, just do a quick, even tonight, I know you have a lot of things to do, but even if you could tonight, how many yes, no's? And give yourself an honest rating and sit back and think, do I need help here, or is all good? And if it's all great, I'm happy for you. But I'll hazard a guess that everybody we've done this with so far has said, yeah, we need help because we haven't gone far enough. Are there any questions that have been coming up? I don't have the comment box open right now, but I'm curious if there's questions on the content of what we've been covering today.
I can check the chat. I don't know, Jeff, have you been scanning it? Are there any questions? Otherwise, I'll share the question I asked the resilience master. I even said that what toppled his business, right? Like no business is 100% resilient, right? And yeah, I remember.
I would say technology is really critical for me now because I work in Central America, the Caribbean, in the US, and here in Canada. And taking the entire, we need you on site, we need you working with us, to being a very remote while we're trying to cobble through as best as we can. Technology became such a critical issue for me of reliability that when it wasn't working, I couldn't work because my clients expected that hand touching all hours of the day. What are we doing and how? So to me, it really focused, Ed, you probably should have done more on the technology, which has made us more resilient moving forward. But now it's working with them with that same ideology. How do we improve the reliability of their supply chains? If I can't travel to Yellowknife in the territories or Grand Cayman or Belize, how are we actually changing the service and the deliverable we provide so it's still meeting the value of the client of what they're expecting from us? It's been a shift, like it's a change of mindset. Mm-hmm. But I got to tell you, my wife is very happy that I'm at home as long as I have been over this COVID. In fact, she calls it a blessing right now. Just we'll take it as me being home as the blessing, but it's forced us to change the way we think.
I think there's a question, what is a good amount of insurance to cover versus percentage of sales? I think it depends why you're getting insurance and what you're getting insurance for, and just reach out to us maybe for something specific like that, because it probably is how much do you have and what type of insurance, right? Like just because your sales drop doesn't mean you're gonna get money, right? So I think you need to look into the nitty-gritty of that. But we're obviously not insurance salespeople, but we can connect you with people, and often an insurance provider should go through your thing every year, right? Or at least every 3 years and reevaluate, right? What has changed? Is this still appropriate? So I hope that answers Adrian's question.
And Adrian, just to follow up for you too, one of the things I've always posed back to our clients when they've asked this question, how much insurance should I have? I've turned around and said, well, how deep are your pockets? Because if you are brand new, have no reserves, and one interruption will completely bankrupt you, your level of coverage is much more than if you said, no, I have reserves, we can weather a storm, or we're looking for essential coverage. It's not a cut and paste exercise. There's no one standard that I could say this is good for everybody. It's really dependent upon your operational environment and where you're at.
Yeah, and someone, Nancy, mentions how much time it takes to go through this. And it's one of those things where you hope you never have to use it, but if it's there, you don't have to think about it. And that gives you a competitive advantage.
If you start with the questions and you find you answered no to everything, it'll take you longer. But I would say, even if you looked at people and equipment, could you tell me what your key equipment is, what you rely on, and if you could just answer the question, can you get it from multiple sources or is it only from one? Just scratching the surface and going below the surface one level will give you a lot of comfort on we either need to do more or we're okay the way we are. Start with the questions and just ask and assess what your response is. That will really drive a lot of the how much further, how far do we have to go, how much time is this going to take? And that conversation that Eva is offering up is to poke and find out, do you need to deep dive and where would you need to focus?
Yeah, maybe slip to the next slide where our contact information is, because someone said, wow, cool, 30 minutes. So then here's my contact information, and you can reach out. And because it's virtual, I can do a face-to-face with anyone. First come, first serve. So whoever's first will have a competitive advantage.
If there's no other questions, to me, resiliency and continuity is all about strategy. You're here not just because you want to do something and be gone next year. You're here because you want a business and you want it to continue, and you want to employ people, and you want to be a good corporate citizen and be involved in your community, and you have customers that have a palate that likes your particular brand or hops or flavor, whatever it might be. There is this ecosystem that works together. And when disruptions in the ecosystem occur, it's amazing how today customers who you thought were fiercely loyal will immediately move to another competitor and move on and not come back. So when you're considering what the risks are to your business, that also should drive how far you go in terms of your business resiliency and planning. Because if you say, no, they'll come back even if I'm down for a year, I'm going to push you a little bit and say that just might not be the case. Be realistic with the risks that you're exposed to. That's it, unless there's anything else. Thanks, everybody.
Comments in the chat, people chatting. Yeah.
I like the review regularly with your insurance advisor. Yes. I've been talking about developing resilient global supply chains for at least 20 years, and I introduced my students at the KPU Brewing program to the concepts in their planning and management course. They paid way more attention this year than in previous years.
Yeah.
I almost want to say stop recording because I want to make a comment that they'll probably come back to haunt me. I've always been a believer in risk and business resilience, that sometimes audiences and companies have a deaf ear. And it takes a good pandemic, it takes a good disaster to actually wake people up. And Eva, you talked about this a little bit earlier. When you shake the environment and say, hey, you really need to wake up and do things different, this is one of those driving disruptors that is causing people to say, how should I be different? Don't go through the pandemic and come out the other side thinking your business as usual will continue as usual. Reflect on what's happened, make yourself more resilient. It's something that I look for, and I'm happy it happened. I'm not happy for deaths, but it should make you sit up and be aware that you've got to start looking at things differently.
Yeah, because we know this happened now, but what will be the next thing, right? Yeah, it'll be employees getting poached. It'll be who knows, right?
Well, thank you very much, Ed and Eva and Jeff. That was really great. Not only was there lots of great comments in the chat line, my phone was blowing up about thank you. This is awesome content. So really appreciate that. And thanks, Jeff, for recognizing also Matt at Capri CMW. Capri has been our insurance provider for over 5 years. Matt is always on this. I remember him years ago talking about exactly business interruption in a hack of a business. And that was kind of prior to, and so you guys know, and you probably know this, a number of companies in our industry have been hacked, most notably Container World, and it took them, it was devastating to them. And even the liquor board, BDL for a while, the supplier, which wasn't so bad because they distribute Molson Labatt, but no, I'm joking about that. It was awful. I'm joking. So
but
we're going to come back to
opportunity, right?
What's that?
That creates opportunity too when something bad happens, right?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So thank you so much to MNP. We really appreciate that. And take Eva up on that offer. That's incredible. That's there's your way to start. You've got a little bit of homework. Open a nice beer and do your homework, and then get back to Eva. We'll be back at 11. Stop that clapping. We'll be back at 11, and we have surviving audits, CSL consultants, Christian Hui, who I think many of you probably know from his days at CRA, surviving an audit, and the LDB audits, which is a very major topic that we've been working on. So see everyone at 11. Thanks.
Like people, businesses have their journey, their path, sometimes straight, but more often evolving, growing, and adapting to a changing world, creating the need for knowledge in areas like accounting, consulting, tax, technology, areas critical to your continued growth and success, all part of the journey, all part of what we do together with you. Because your success is the destination. MNP, wherever business takes you.